From the moment we are born, we find ourselves groping in the dark, seeking some type of anchor, some type of security. Identity. When a child is born, there's a reaching out, looking for anything where the child will feel some sense of solidity, some type of security. The sixth senses come in. They're the ropes to hang on to, identify with. Eventually, we start identifying features, light and darkness, shadows, colors, details, all of which get to receive our validation. Above all, our name, who our parents are, where we live, our favorite things, our favorite toys, favorite food, likes and dislikes. All of these are efforts on part of the living being to secure oneself. By the same token, to distinguish oneself from its own environment. But when we carefully look at what is really taking place behind all of this, as a driving force, as an impetus, as the momentum creator, we see that there is pain. We see that there is dukkha. We see that there is this uncertainty in the face of which the child is doing all these things. Otherwise, why would there be a need to identify? The last 4 weeks or 4 sessions of our sutta explorations, we saw how the Buddha was explaining the errors in our thinking, especially in terms of imagining, manana, how we create identifications. But there was a gradual evolution, gradual shift that happens. And that's what this Dhamma is providing us with. The Dhamma comes as the answer, as the antidote to that sense of uncertainty. Freedom from dukkha. Freedom from dukkha is really an existential shift. And that's what we're after. That existential shift, that freedom, that psychological, emotional freedom, which the Dhamma provides. The thing that moves us, however, in that direction is a realization, an understanding, and an appreciation for the need in us to get security. Now, the problem is we seek for security in the wrong ways. And that comes from a lack in understanding and ignorance, the Buddha says again and again, as we saw with the 24 concepts that were covered in the Bhaddiya Sutta that we went over during the last 4 exploration classes here. So the existential shift is about giving us freedom from the absence of uncertainty. and pain, because that's very painful. This is what we see in individuals who have everything. We think we see that they have everything, and for all intents and purposes, they might really have everything that we do not have. Looks, money, prestige, status, health, youth, and all of the above. However, there's pain they're experiencing. And if you ever get to really hear them speak, confide in you and speak to you about their worst pain, it's astounding. Because part of your brain will say, well, wait a minute, they have everything. Why? Why is this person in pain still? Like, it doesn't make sense. Well, they know something is wrong, because obtaining things that society gives, pedigree gives, where we're born might give, family, etc., all these things, education, good karma, good merits, can still leave you on the boondocks of pain, craving for certainty, security. Security is the absence of uncertainty, the way I see it, because there's pain otherwise. Why are we afraid of death? Well, that's the big uncertainty dilemma, which is in every living being, from the highest of devas down to the lowest of animals, to even non-humans, non-living, as we now, non-sentient beings even. Petas are afraid, hungry ghosts are afraid. So it's deep. And every one of us is then looking for shelter. And this is where we will see the individual today that we will be covering the sutta, which happens to be the Bhaddiya Sutta from the Khuddaka Nikaya's Udana, which I think we've explored maybe at least once with the Bhaddiya Sutta, one of the earliest suttas we've explored together. So we'll see Venerable Bhaddiya, who is we don't know that much about, but we know enough how he was one of the venerables who was a prince before being a bhikkhu. He was one of the first ordained, relatively first, in the earliest days of the sasana. He went and gave up his wealth, his prestige, along with Venerable Anuruddha, Venerable Ananda, and some of the other princes, and gave up the wealth and security. Here's an example of somebody that I was referring to who, although for all intents and purposes has everything, yet in all factuality, he doesn't. This is where a lot of people have misconstrued or misunderstood, at least, and come up with their own theories as to why Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, left the royal life. We seem to brush it off. We seem to push it aside as unimportant data, unnecessary. Yes, it adds some interesting historical, almost fairy tale-like nuances to the whole structure of Buddhism, foundation of Buddhism, but it's relatively unimportant. It's very important. Why would a human being who has finally reached a state where there is a lot of comfort willfully go and choose something that has the opposite of that? There's absence of certainty of food, for example. From day to day, you don't know whether you're going to get food or not, or where you're going to sleep, whether you will have some shelter. Will there be anybody to hear your ouch when you step on something sharp, or you injure your ankles, or you sprain them, or you injure your finger, or you have a terrible headache, or you fall and you break some body part? You're injured, you're bleeding. You're alone. So this brings up some very deep primal fears in us of being abandoned. But something must drive the person to be willing to go all the way, because they've gone to the opposite direction as well, to the extreme of that. They have seen luxury. They have seen that even in the court, surrounded by all those guards and a father who loves him, this is in the case of Siddhartha Gautama, stepmother who loves him, raised him as her own, yet he felt alone in his pain, the discontent that is deep, because that also has a lot to do with the progression, the evolution of the individual from life to life, working towards understanding, towards that existential shift that I was mentioning. So here we have Venerable Bhaddiya, who we'll meet him not as a layperson, as an upasaka, but he's already a bhikkhu. But we're going to hear or see fellow bhikkhus of his who are dissatisfied with him, not because he was doing something bad, but because he wasn't falling in line with them in doing things the way they wanted him to, which tells you a lot about human nature, right? Whether a person is in robes or as a layperson, people have expectations of you. And usually they have the nuances of social construct, social companionships, and things like that. So we're going to see Venerable Bhaddiya standing out as a dilemma for them, and how the sutta progresses from there. So this will not be as, I would say, perhaps complex as Mula Pariyaya, but nevertheless is equally beautiful, I think. So let us go ahead and start. So this is the Udana 2.10. It is a book. It's a book contained within the Nikaya, which is the Kuddaka Nikaya, or the shorter discourses. In the same Kuddaka Nikaya, we find Dhammapada, we find the Itivuttaka, we find the Udana, we find the Theragata, we find the Terigata, and the Sutta Nipata. Those are the original books we find in the Kuddaka. Later, there were more added ones, other things. But the Udana means in English inspired utterances, statements. And this is one of the oldest books, oldest set of discourses we find, oldest in also the historically oldest in the life of the Sasana. The awakening of the Buddha, the first encounters he had with individuals, students, early Arahants, as well as Bahya, if you remember, as I mentioned earlier. And here we have the Bhaddiya, Venerable Bhaddiya in the form of Bhaddiya Sutta occurring. So Udana 2.10. Bhaddiya Sutta, the Venerable Bhaddiya. This is what I personally heard. Once the Blessed One was residing at the mango grove close to Anupiya. It was around that time that the Venerable Bhaddiya, son of Kali Godha, had recently taken refuge in the Triple Gem and gone forth. In addition, he went into seclusion by removing himself from the crowd and retreating into the wilderness. Living there in the forest, whether while sitting by the roots of a tree or living and practicing in his empty dwelling, he would often exclaim in an inspired utterance to himself, while breathing it out with a soothing sigh. Ah, this is bliss. This is bliss indeed. Now, other bhikkhus heard that the son of Kaligodha had recently taken refuge in the Triple Gem and gone forth. In addition, they heard that he went into seclusion by removing himself from the crowd and thus retreated into the wilderness. Furthermore, these bhikkhus also heard that although living there in the forest, whether while sitting by the roots of a tree or living and practicing in his empty kuti dwelling, the Venerable Bhaddiya continued exclaiming to himself, "Ah, this is bliss. This is bliss indeed." Then these bhikkhus began discussing amongst each other as they concluded, "Surely the Venerable Bhaddiya is unhappy in leading the holy life. He must be struggling, having now gone forth and leaving his former life of a royal behind, in order to live the life of a bhikkhu." Interesting how the average mind processes information, especially things that they can't figure out. And that could tell you about where they came from, because these were people who were drooling at the edges of their mouth as it comes down to the fact about or having possessions. It didn't make sense for them that this royal gave up everything. I mean, they had to, because they were without food to begin with. Let's not forget, many of the bhikkhus were poor before they became bhikkhus. So they looked at becoming ordained as their way out, as their way, in a sense, to success, whatever that means. But definitely it meant there were going to be food on the table. But they were secretly in love with the potential of gaining fame, possessions. Here was a person who had given up all of that. And he was saying, "This is bliss?" Okay, there's something wrong with this picture. According to their interpretation, that is. Let's continue. This is them still, discussing amongst themselves. It is no surprise that now he, Venerable Bhaddiya, keeps recollecting the happiness and blissful state he enjoyed as a householder living in royal luxury, which is why now, while secluded there in the forest, whether while sitting by the roots of a tree or living and practicing in his empty dwelling, the Venerable Bhaddiya continues exclaiming to himself, "Ah, this is bliss. This is bliss indeed." We want safety. When we find safety, in the absolute sense, for the person involved, if we find it, it is bliss. It is comfort. It is an existential shift that has taken place. There is an absence of pain. In fact, there is certainty. There's no more wanting, which is at the core of every single desire. It's painful when we have desire, craving, or tanha, and its constant thirst for more is painful to have. And that is what we're always after, not the object per se, not the object of desire. We are not after that, really. We are after the extinguishing of the fire of the wanting, to plug up that hole of constant thirst for more. That is painful, not the object of desire, whether it's visual, auditory, related with smell, taste, touch, or thought, or mental state. We just want peace. We just want quiet. We just want no longer any agitation. And Nibbana is that, the absence of agitation. And let's see what happens. Later, several of those bhikkhus, the ones who were gossiping in the background, went and approached the Blessed One. And after paying their respects, they sat down to one side and proceeded to inform the teacher on what they thought was taking place with the Venerable Bhaddiya, while reporting, Bhante, as you already know, the son of Kali Godha, having recently taken refuge in the Triple Gem and gone forth, is now in seclusion, removing himself from the crowd and thus retreating into the wilderness. Now, Bhante, it has been reported that although he would be sitting by the roots of a tree or living and practicing in his empty dwelling, the Venerable Bhaddiya continues exclaiming to himself, Ah, this is bliss. This is bliss indeed. So, on hearing about this matter, Bhante, we here began discussing it amongst ourselves and thus reached the conclusion. Surely the Venerable Bhaddiya is unhappy in leading the holy life. He must be struggling, having now gone forth and leaving his former life of a royal behind in order to live the life of a bhikkhu. It is no surprise, then, that now he keeps recollecting the happiness and blissful state he enjoyed as a householder, living in royal luxury. Which is why now, while secluded there in the forest, whether while sitting by the roots of a tree or living and practicing in his empty dwelling, the Venerable Bhaddiya continues to exclaim to himself, Ah, this is bliss. This is bliss indeed. Then, on hearing what they had said, the Blessed One addressed a certain bhikkhu in this manner. Come, bhikkhu, please go to the bhikkhu Bhaddiya and inform him. The teacher calls you. Then, by replying, Yes, Bhante, that bhikkhu left and informed the Venerable Bhaddiya, the son of Kali Godha, the following. Friend Bhaddiya, the teacher calls you. Yes, friend, replied the Venerable Bhaddiya, as he immediately went and approached the Blessed One. And once having paid his respects to the teacher, he sat to one side, and the Blessed One addressed the Venerable Bhaddiya, the son of Kali Godha, by saying, Is it true, Bhaddiya, that although living secluded in the forest, whether while sitting by the roots of a tree or living and practicing in your empty dwelling, you would often exclaim an inspired utterance to yourself while breathing it out with a soothing sigh, Ah, this is bliss. This is bliss indeed. Yes, Bhante, that is true. You can almost see a gentle smile on the face of Lord Buddha as he's asking, because he knows exactly what's going on with Venerable Bhaddiya. He knows, but for the sake of hopefully getting some sense knocked into those other idiotic bhikkhus sitting there questioning, he's indulging. And there's a protocol here. Whenever there's an issue to keep the coherence of the Sangha intact, Lord Buddha would always lend an ear to these complaints, because this is a complaint. This is a, okay, Bhante, something's wrong, we have to fix it. So Venerable Bhaddiya is there, and Lord Buddha's, you can sense how he's proud of his student, happy. But you're not going to see that, until later, as Venerable Bhaddiya is about to speak. So he says, yes, Bhante, that is true. And Lord Buddha asks, but Bhaddiya, what is the reason that although living secluded in the forest, whether while sitting by the roots of a tree or living and practicing in your empty dwelling, you would often exclaim in an inspired utterance to yourself while breathing it out with a soothing sigh, ah, this is bliss. This is bliss indeed. And Venerable Bhaddiya responds, well, Bhante, in the past, I was the ruler of my domain while living the life of a householder. Yet, even though I was surrounded by opulence and prestige, I relied heavily on the presence of my palace guards for my protection and welfare, where I could not even leave my royal court or move about in my domain, or simply walk around even in my city without the presence of my constant companions, the royal personal guards, for my protection and well-being. However, blessed Lord, despite being constantly watched over and surrounded by my security guards, I lived a most dreadful life, being a prisoner to my own fears. Given my position and responsibilities at court, possessing no peace or a genuine sense of security, but many worries in my heart. Thus I lived in perpetual anxiety and nervousness, in constant fear of some threat or harm befalling me or my domain. How many people in power today in the world could relate to that? If they're being 100% honest, they will say, absolutely, we know exactly how that feels. Initially, it might be very interesting. It might be very much gratifying to feel that special when you have all these people who are ready to lay down their lives for you, whether you're a president of a country, a king or a queen, or some celebrity with so much money you don't know what to do with it, or a CEO of a company. But eventually it gets too much, where you cannot do anything without others following you, or, well, even with good intent, in a sense, to protect you or your loved ones. So now you're living in fear. Your loved ones are always in danger because you're that important. Your domain, basically, that's where the loved ones fall into, right? People are waiting for you to fail. And that's a lot of pressure. You have to protect your possessions, things that people can come and steal. The four elements could come and tear away from you, or even, especially, death or sickness. But now, he says, he continues, after all that, he says, but now, Bhante, even though I am mostly alone, in seclusion, living in the wilderness, whether while sitting by the roots of a tree or retreating into my empty hut, I have no fear whatsoever, nor any worries or concerns of some impending threat coming to me somehow. Instead, I live calm and unperturbed, subdued and at ease, roaming free in the wilderness like a wild deer, surviving by depending on the kindness of those who feed me, comfortably relaxed with an ever-present sense of security. So beautiful, isn't it? Therefore, blessed Lord, it is for this reason that although living secluded in the forest, whether while sitting by the roots of a tree or living and practicing in my empty dwelling, from time to time I cannot help but exclaim to myself as I breathe it out with a soothing sigh. Ah, this is bliss. This is bliss indeed. Then the Blessed One, highlighting the significance of the event, made this inspired utterance as well. Those who no longer have anything to hide, with no rage or angst or any agitation left inside the heart, are truly the ones who have traversed and gone beyond, having left all sorts of rebirth and becomings behind. They are indeed the ones who are genuinely happy and free, with no grief, sorrow, or fear to ever tie them down. For they are the ones indeed whom even the highest of devas can no longer trace or see. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Lord Buddha was not exercising creative license here by using flamboyantly flowery words because he's moved emotionally, being poetic with some colorful imagery. Every single word the Lord Buddha used was well thought out, well spoken, svakato. Every single word Lord Buddha spoke about that state refers to the Arahant, the natural state of the Arahant, who is free. And in this case, the Arahant being referred to is Venerable Bhaddiya. So that was the seal of approval, acknowledgement, which, by the way, Venerable Bhaddiya did not need. The other Bhikkhus needed, so that they could sleep better at night and hopefully be inspired so that they can start practicing for a change. Instead of thinking about, okay, what do we want to discuss today after the lunch or on the way to get lunch? There's a certain urgency that has to be there for the practice to evolve, to grow, to get us somewhere. Yesterday, by the way, I have some good news because after a long time, you probably know that I've been working on, after finishing the Anguttara Nikaya suttas, retranslating it and narrating it. I had taken the task of working on the Sangyutta Nikaya, the connected or linked discourses of the Buddha, which also is in the thousands of suttas. So one of the biggest chunks of it I was able to finish yesterday. So Nidana Vagga Sangyutta is finally done. I'm glad to say. It was over 870 plus suttas. The one before that, the Sagata Vagga Sutta, was over 1,300, I think. That's already complete. So I'm starting the Kanda Vagga Sangyutta. The reason why, and all the merits to be gained by that wonderful work, wonderful because of what it means to us, all of the merits I happily and gladly and full-heartedly share with all of you, your loved ones, and all those who have been supportive of this work. But the thing which reminded me of it was because yesterday, as I was translating one of the last ones of this Nidana Vagga Sangyutta, which is, by the way, Nidana means a causation. So extensive suttas highlighting the various aspects of causation, causality, conditionality, paticca samuppada was covered there. But one particular sutta, we have something very similar to this event that happened with Venerable Bhaddiya. There was a bhikkhu who's not given a name, in fact, other than the elder, who was an elder or senior, which we call in Pali Tera, only by name. He was considered a Tera only by name. So initially, when you're reading the sutta's title, at least, you're thinking, oh, he's one of the many, many who are like that, just by name, because, you know, they just have the stripes of how many vasas they've had, and that's the end of it, which unfortunately, sadly, is the case in the world of Dhamma today, and has been for centuries. But then you read the sutta, in my case, as I'm going through it and redoing it, there's this encounter where, just like Lord Buddha did with someone, he sent a bhikkhu, he's like, go call him, say the teacher calls you, ask him to come here in my name. And he does. And you see how this bhikkhu was being blamed simply for seeking seclusion, the practice alone. And that he wasn't coming outside to spend it with the other bhikkhus to stitch or mend the robes, do the other chores. So Lord Buddha asks him, my son, why is this true? And he says, yes, Bhante, I practice alone time. When I go to the village, I come back with the food. I eat it, and then I quickly go back to Chankama, walking meditation, which I strive and I do, and then when I get exhausted, I sit down and practice continuously. And Lord Buddha says, very good. That is not the only way that you can practice seclusion. All of a sudden, it turns into a Dhamma talk to help that bhikkhu. And he says, my son, when you're practicing, you have to understand the other nuances of what I mean by seclusion. And he's like, all ears, yes, Bhante. And he says, when you're practicing, when images and thoughts of the past show up, experiences and feelings, and you can't avoid them, sannyas, perceptions of the past, memories show up, you drop them there right on the spot. Don't entertain them. Don't chew them up. Don't regurgitate them. Don't dwell on them. Drop them immediately and go back to your practice. And when things and wishes and yearnings for a future possibility or plausibility of things show up, do the same. Relinquish them on the spot. Don't entertain any of it. And when you do, he says, then you won't be struggling with anything within the present, with any sannyas, with any perceptions, with any memories, and you will be truly making the most of seclusion. What a beautiful sutta. And this is exactly what's also been happening with Venerable Bhaddiya, that led him to the attainment of awakening. We have other suttas where we see Venerable Sariputta saying that, something similar. Bhava nirodho nibbana, he says. The cessation, the ending of becoming, the desire to become is nibbana. Ah, bliss. And then one of the interesting characters that we have from the earliest days of the sasana, when he was not an Arahant, Venerable Udayi, he pops his head and he says, well, wait a minute, what kind of a feeling is this? That there's no feeling and you're calling it bliss? Because Nibbana is also considered unfelt bliss. So beyond the range of feeling, so you're no longer captive to feelings. You're no longer seeking refuge in the pleasurable feeling or an escape from the painful by rushing into the arms of the fleeting, flimsy, futile, good feeling. Why flimsy? Why futile? Because it is impermanent as well. It will leave you on your face. It's unreliable because it is conditioned. Nibbana, on the other hand, is the unconditioned. It is the unfelt bliss. And Venerable Bhaddiya complains to Venerable Sariputta. He says, what kind of a bliss is that when you can't even feel it? And he says, that's exactly it. The very reason why it is beyond the confines of feeling. We have done that sutta, by the way, some time ago. Existential shift is what we're after. And this is a perfect example of what that entails and where that leads a person. Because as the child is trying to grope, trying to create these make-believe shelters, which we go on perpetuating that habit in the relationships we seek in life, in the professions, in the education, in the books we read, experiences we go and try to cultivate or try to add like metals. What we're doing is we're trying to build a house of cards. You injure your toes, your fingers. You never want to have a migraine headache ever again. You don't want to get sick ever again. You want to have just a creme de la creme type of experience in life. And here, yet again, as if Siddhartha Gautama's example was not enough, we have so many others, including this Venerable Bhaddiya's. We have to ask what drives a person to leave that luxury and to go into what is ostensibly something of the opposite nature, lacking in that luxury or resources. Venerable Anuruddha, who was going to be king himself, gave it up, passed it on to his brother Mahanama, and he became a bhikkhu. In the Theragatha, his portion, his verses, he says, with so much joy, he describes his day when he would go around looking in the trash bins for discarded pieces of rags that he would collect. And then he would go wash carefully. And then he would go dye them carefully. And then he would go and turn them into pieces of his robes, his new robes. What drives a person to do that? Somebody who has really seen through the delusion of the fake controllable environments that we think we have, the control over the settings, the control over life, the control over this body. People used to come complaining to Lord Buddha that he was teaching individuals to become passive by walking away from their worldly responsibilities. And he would challenge them saying, well, what are you trying to control? Oh, you have control over? Oh, yes, I have control over everything. Okay, he says, let's take the example of King Bimbisara, who was alive at the time. He says, oh, yes, the King of Rajagha. Yes, yeah, him. One and only, King Bimbisara, who was, by the way, who became a Sotapanna, one of the earliest students of Lord Buddha, Unpasaka. King Ajatasattu's, Prince Ajatasattu's father. He says, do you think King Bimbisara has control over his entire domain? He says, yes, but then he pauses and he says, well, absolute control? Well, yeah. If somebody does something bad, commits a crime, he's going to get punished. He might even get decapitated, his head cut off, depending on the severity of his crime. He says, okay. But do you think that King Bimbisara has absolute control? He says, well, seeing that you put it that way, he doesn't. Can he get sick? Yes. Are there other things that are happening in his domain that he's not in control of? Well, of course. Can he control a single hair on his head from turning gray or falling? Well, of course not. He can't control that. And he can't, you see what happened? All that idea of control falls apart. All these leaders in the world, powerful individuals, past, present, or future, they would save themselves so much time and others so much suffering if they just think about the fact that we all will leave here dead. Nobody's going to come out of here alive. So there's death. And usually, if they're lucky, a long process of aging and getting sick. So where's the safe environment that we talk about, that we are promised by buying this, getting that, obtaining that experience? Where's the safety there? If it is safe, then you should have it for good. But life does not offer us that. The healthy body is not going to stay healthy. It will become weak. The muscles will atrophy. Memory will not work. Eyesight will not work as good as it did. Joints will not work as good as they did. So where's the safety? Where's the stability that we sought after? Where's the predictability? Because that's also part of the seeking of security. We want to know that the money you put in the safe is going to stay there. Well, what if the money gets devalued overnight? I think it happened one time, many times I'm sure, but I think it happened in India about over a decade ago, I think, where people had money and then that currency did not work anymore the next day. And many, many people didn't know about that. So you go to the bank with stacks of cash and you say, give me, whatever, gold or something in, exchange. And they say the only exchange is the trash can over there. Well, what if the person has worked 20 years collecting that? It sounds horrendous, but it's not as horrendous as it is when we are spending a life with this body, relying on things that this body will not be able to cash, essentially. The person goes and, achieves things. I had an uncle whom I had never met. One day, my father came and he said, I was very young. I remember I think 6. And my parents came into the room and they said, your uncle died. And I said, which uncle? Because he lived in a different country. And he said, there was a car accident and he was a taxi driver. He had gone to the airport to collect a group of students, his passengers, and he was driving them to their home. So these students had come, or graduates rather, had gone to many countries, different countries, Western countries, this and that. And they had come back with their degrees in their 20s, maybe early 30s, and that's it. You can see all the promise around that, how much sacrifice that took, how many years, decades of hard work, parents toiling to send them money to get accepted into a foreign country, whether it's Germany, UK, or US. So they had just come back to their country, and my uncle was the taxi driver. As he had, I think there were 5 people in the car, plus my uncle, plus 5 graduates with degrees returning home. On the way, a big truck, as it was overtaking another truck, which is something that happens in different parts of the world, India, Middle East, etc. They cross the lane and they try to overtake each other. because it's wide open spaces. As one of them was doing that, he doesn't go back into his lane and comes and hits straight ahead the taxi in which my uncle and those passengers were. All of them die instantaneously. What could that have done to the families, to the mothers, to the fathers of these kids who came in from overseas with so much potential, so much future promises? Where is the predictability factor? Where is the seeking of shelter? They were more educated than any of the best educated ones in their villages. Each of these individuals. Where did all that go? See how fickle it is, the security that we seek. Where we go and want shelter, as Venerable Bhaddiya did. I mean, he had, private security guard. In America, it's called secret service, I think. Secret service agents. They're the ones who protect the President of the United States. Well, good luck. You can get shot at any time. Nobody's going to be able to protect you that much. I remember in the early 80s, the Pope got shot with so much, so many protectors. It's all fickle. And even if they're protected, Stalin died in his room, in his mansion, in his palace. And for hours, they did not dare to knock on the door to go inside to see what happened to their vicious leader. Finally, I think 16 hours later, somebody has the guts to go in, because if they annoyed him, they might be sent to the gulag, all the way into Siberia. Same thing happened, in a sense, to Mao Zedong in China some years after. People were afraid. Understandably so, because millions of people died at the hands of these individuals who seemed like they were almost like gods, untouchable. But wise is the person who sees this before it gets to that point, before you become senile and unable to really pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Because it takes guts for a Bhaddiya, for a person like that, to leave everything and go. And now I'm not saying, the Buddha was not even suggesting for us to leave everything and go. No, it's your craving, your attachments that you need to abandon and walk away from, not literally your family, your children, your other responsibilities. If you're unable to, if you don't have the means to, that's not as important as walking away from the things that have a strong grasp of you, a grip, tight grip over you. That's the thing. Because that means if there is such a grab, a wanting to grab, it means there's a wanting to identify, there's a continuous effort being applied to seek out refuge in that. Physical beauty, wealth, having a reliable, honest mate who doesn't cheat on you. But how could you guarantee that? That person might be truthful, 100% honest, this and that, but you do not control all the pieces. The moment that person walks away from you, it's all up. You don't. It's all up to various different factors. Nothing is solid. Your loved one, they're walking away, getting into their car. You don't know what will happen. My uncle, when he said goodbye to his 2 kids and his wife, as he was getting into his car to drive to the airport to pick those graduates up from the airport, he was so happy. You can almost hear the laughter they had as they were talking in the car. What happened? But there's no point in becoming melancholic about these things because we've been going through it so many times. Death is not such a big deal in a sense because we've been going through it so many countless times. But every single time it feels like we have never experienced it. So we're numb to it, in a sense, to the past deaths. So we need to create that opportunity for us to take action. But we won't be able to do that unless we appreciate the severity of our situation, because any moment we could go, and the severity, because here's the opportunity where we still have Dhamma, the teaching that is proper, that is the one that helps us to leave the cycle of birth and death. That's why these people had to make that huge leap of faith. Sometimes we think they never had a pushback from their parents. Do you honestly think that Venerable Bhaddiya, as he was walking away, his mom and his dad and his loved ones didn't stop in the way, block their way, say, please don't go, don't do this? They didn't drop down in front of their feet and beg them not to go. We see countless examples. Venerable Rattapala was one. His parents never gave up on trying, on hoping and wishing that he comes back. Something really transformative has to happen within the person to see the inevitability of what is to come. And the person has to get sick and tired of experiencing that drive to seek safety and never get it. That terrible thirst for security and safety that never is delivered by the six sense doors, by the world. No mate, no husband, no wife, no child, no father, no mother will ever be able to give you that. No domain, no kingship, no rulership will ever give you that. No fame, no possession will ever give you that. No recognition, nor no status will give you that. And if you're in a position where you're enjoying those things, wonderful, but it will run out. These are individuals who it became so clear, concrete for them, the fact that it will end. And they said, okay, now's the time for me to do so. Something about it. And that's when they realized, like Venerable Bhaddiya, there's no bodyguards around me. There's no secret service around me. I'm fine. I'm fine. Oh, look at that. That's a peacock walking around, minding its own business in the forest. It doesn't care. I was an aristocrat. The mosquito that comes. How many bodyguards can actually protect you from a mosquito bite? Or a bellyache? Or something bad you end up eating? Will they be able to take away your headache? Your loved one, your mother, your own father, the most important person in your life, will they be able to take away your pain? Do you understand now why it's important for us to look and see this journey, this thing called life, with the help of the Dhamma, that this is all a personal affair? Not even the Buddha could give us that experience of, this is bliss. This is bliss, indeed. Not even the Buddha. You experience that, and then you go to the Buddha. The order. Get the order right. The Buddha never gave Nibbana to anybody. It doesn't fall from the sky. It's not a grace. It's not a revelation. It is work. But it doesn't have to be painful work either. It has to be joyful. It has to be blissful. And that's what Venerable Bhaddiya, in my opinion, is offering us. We're so grateful that this incident was recorded and we get to enjoy it And we also can smile with Venerable Bhaddiya, celebrate that moment. And that is the ultimate guarantor of true satisfaction, true comfort, true sigh of relief. So I will stop here and see if there are comments, thoughts, questions. This is going to be a shorter sutta. Not everyone is going to, not each one, not every sutta needs to be 2 hours, like, or more. Some deserve it, of course. Any thoughts, questions? If not, then we shall transfer some merit. Akasatha chabumata devanagamahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasanam. Akasatha chabumata devanagamahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desanam. Akasatha chabumata devanagamahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you all be well. May you be healthy. May your practice continuously grow. May your loved ones be healthy, prosperous, strong. May your relationship with them be beautiful, respectful, loving, amicable. And may the Dhamma grow in your hearts and in the hearts of your loved ones and everyone you meet. Until next time. Sukhi Hot.